Hello, my name is Kieran Timothy. I'm a mental health counselor here at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Today, what we're going to be doing is a workshop series or a workshop for our aeronautical pilots entitled ACE Your Check Ride, a mental guide to your check ride. Being a licensed mental health counselor, I don't have any specific training in aviation that will qualify me to speak on the specifics of the check ride process, such as maneuvers or the ways that you can conduct particular procedures according to the airman's service requirements. However, I can speak about the psychological components that's a part of any performance and how we can address things like nervousness and anxiety that typically get in the way of optimal performance. So let's begin. So we have a couple learning outcomes or objectives for today. We're going to identify the common challenges connected to the check ride. We're going to learn strategies for reducing mental and physical stress connected to the check ride experience. And then finally, the challenge or the take home would be to develop a personal preparation plan for your check ride experience. So the way that I've conceptualized the check ride process for the purposes of this workshop is in the following three parts. So the written component, the oral component, and the physical, so the flight component of the check ride process. And for many of you, there are certain things that probably come to mind when you think of your check ride. You may think of the same three things that I mentioned. You may think about the specific subject areas that you need to be proficient in and qualified in order to be successful. You think about what it means to get to be successful and pass, or to get a discontinuance, or a deficient in certain areas. Regardless of the different parts that come to mind first, there are probably certain parts that result in feelings of anxiety and questioning for you. And you may know a little bit about what are the things that add to that sense of anxiety. A lot of times when I speak with pilots that are in the process of preparing for their check ride, it may be uncertainty around the study plan or the study strategy that they're using, how well they're going to be able to retain and recall the specific information that's going to be relevant or important for them to be successful. It may be in terms of managing the flight, being able to successfully conduct or complete the specific maneuvers that are in mind. So take a moment and you can kind of reflect on the parts of this process that add the greatest stress or anxiety for you. Hopefully, as we continue this workshop, some of those concerns, if not all of those concerns, are going to be addressed in some way, or you're going to have some first steps that you can take in addressing those particular issues. So the mental guide is broken into an acronym, ACE, and ACE stands for addressing nervousness. So that would be overcoming the nervousness that's oftentimes connected to our level of preparation, be that training and skill or the study tactics or techniques that we're using. Calming anxiety, and we all have a sense of what anxiety might look like and feel like, but it's usually the physical and mental component that's a part of doing a particular task, especially if a task that has some uncertain outcomes for us. And we're going to be using things like mindfulness and relaxation techniques to address the anxiety and taking actions to calm those feelings of anxiety. And finally, we're going to look at some of the external factors that add stress to the experience of completing the check ride and how you may develop a plan to navigate those concerns. So addressing nervousness. And nervousness is really defined as our perception or perceived level of preparedness. So nervousness is usually connected to our sense of how prepared we are for the specific task that we're doing. If you've ever had the experience of doing the task that you're very familiar with, maybe it's driving through your neighborhood, or let's use that as an example, driving through your neighborhood or driving onto campus from a location that you're very, very familiar with, and you're really comfortable with. You've practiced several times completing that particular task. So usually there's a lot less anxiety that's connected to it. You have the knowledge and the confidence that you're adequately prepared for the task at hand, and usually anxiety is a lot lower. But if you think back to when you were first learning to drive, that there were all sorts of things that were a part of the driving process that you hadn't yet developed a mastery or had sufficient opportunity to practice, whether it's checking your blind spots, merging lanes, knowing how your car functions or handles when it's performing optimally and when there may be signs of distress or concerns that you need to address. So being more prepared and having the practice of going over all of these different tasks lends to you feeling less nervous, more calm and relaxed in those situations. Similarly, there are a number of different things that you'd have to prepare for or account for when you're thinking about your check ride process. So it's being really familiar with the ACS, so the Airman Certification Standards, knowing your aircraft, what the capabilities of your aircraft, so what are the limitations, what are some of those hard numbers that might be connected to safe flight in a particular aircraft. If you're doing something like a cross country, knowing where you're going, where you're landing, where you're taking off from, and where you're landing, and all of the things that you might encounter as a part of that process given the conditions that you're in, being familiar with the maneuvers that you have to complete or perform, mentally prepared. And I kind of highlighted that part because oftentimes there may be a focus on what are some of the technical knowledge that might be connected to being successful in a check ride experience, and less time is given to what are some of the mental things that need to occur to really ensure that your performance is where you're wanting it to be and moving you closer to having a more favorable and positive outcome. So that might be things like relaxation training, acknowledgement, and monitoring, tracking your progress, reflecting and reviewing the things that have gone well in the past, and the ways that you can improve your performance going forward. Because every time you sort of check back and you get a more accurate impression or more accurate idea of how well you're prepared, that's the thing that actually leads to a sense of confidence. When I've given this presentation in the past, and we've had the opportunity to have attendees to the presentation, folks that have done students that have done various check rides before, maybe they've completed their private pilot's license, they've completed their instrument rating, and maybe they're on to that commercial rating. The thing that they often commented on most was that sense of confidence going in to each one of their check rides, but that confidence was built upon the foundation of knowing the successes that they've had before, being able to reflect on the progress that they've made. I usually share with students and pilots that there are three ways that we can really measure or assess our confidence and improve our confidence going forward. So that the first one is the thing that we usually kind of think about, which is our outcome success. So was I able to do the thing that I intended to do? Did I have the necessary or needed outcome? The other one would be progress success. Am I doing all of the individual things? Am I making progress in the direction that I'm wanting to go? For our Riddle students, that would look like for a particular maneuver, maybe I started off and I wasn't successful the first time performing a particular maneuver with my CFI. I got a 2 rating. Like, did I improve my rating to a 3 or a 4 or a 5 for that particular maneuver, for that particular module? Moving forward. So looking at that, but then also the third one is process success. Process success is really the smaller parts that make up the overall goal that you're wanting to accomplish. So if I use the example of taking a free throw, it might be holding the ball correctly, bouncing it on the ground, getting composure, is my form correct, bending my knees, arching my shot, and having that follow through necessary for being successful with that basket. So all of the different individual little pieces add up to successfully making the basket. Similarly, as you're taking off the aircraft, there may be things around your pre-flight check, how you are communicating to ATC, different things that you do as far as lining up before you kind of taxi down the runway. All of these different things that you're doing, you're wanting to see the individual pieces that are part of a successful takeoff or a successful landing. How well are you doing at those individual pieces to see if you have the outcome of a successful takeoff a successful landing, and whether or not you're making progress and how smooth or effective or efficient you're conducting those various components. And then finally, as a part of preparation is knowing that we have all the things that we need. I have the bullet point that I have is have your paperwork ready, but it could also be translated as having all the things that you need ready. So having your log, having your instruments, having whether you have a tablet or different things that assist you as you're flying, you have all of those things that you're prepared, ready for the task at hand. Because usually nervousness and related anxiety is oftentimes connected to this belief that we are going to be missing certain information or missing certain skills necessary to perform the task at hand. And whenever that's the case, we experience nervousness, and it can progress into anxiety, which we'll see in a little bit, has the potential to adversely impact our performance. So the next thing that I'd want you to make note of is just that quote by Zig Ziglar, which is practice is simply preparing for success. So that all of those things, practice and preparation is the thing that can lead to success. Practice and preparation is the thing that results in lower levels of nervousness, lower levels of anxiety, which leads to ultimately better performance. So I want you to think about the ways that you can practice and prepare for your check ride. To add on to that, sometimes it's about getting an accurate measure of our level of preparation. A little bit earlier, we defined the check ride process as sort of this three-part process where you have your oral, you have your written, you have your practical. But really, there are so many other steps that are a part of being successful in a check ride. Every flight hour that you've logged before or previously is a part of your preparation for that check ride. Once you're being advanced or kind of given the go-ahead by your CFI, that it is time to do that private pilot's license check ride or doing that instrument rating check ride. Usually that's coming at the end of them reviewing and discussing particular components of your flight training with you, and then giving you that vote of confidence that they believe that you not only know the knowledge that's necessary to be successful in that particular portion of your flight training, but that you have the necessary skills, all things being equal, to be successful. I encourage students to, especially as you're going into your commercial rating check ride, to have that your raters, your DPE, has the assumption of competence, that they believe that because you're sitting in front of them, because you got that flight, that check ride schedule, that you have satisfied all of the pre-requirements, right? All of those preparation steps to get before them for a positive or a favorable outcome. So I never want students to kind of underestimate the importance of the things that they've done before and how those have all played an integral step in their preparation. Next thing for preparation is, how do you study? That's one of the other things that kind of comes up. And I encourage students to think about it in maybe two ways: looking at the content that you're going to be studying for that particular check ride, and whether it's static, so something that's unchangeable, it's just sort of hard facts that you need to know, things like numbers and different things along the time, versus things that may be more dynamic. So like weather might change, and location may change, and the specific instructions that you might have for an airport that you're landing into, all of those things will change. You may not be able to memorize all of those things, but there are certain things that you can memorize if that information is going to be the same, whether it's a Friday night or a Saturday night, a night flight or a morning flight, all of those things can remain the same. So knowing your numbers, the static studying tools are going to be really helpful for things like numbers, things like terminology, etc. Having flashcards could be a great way of learning a lot of that static content. We have a great resource on our Instagram account for how to make better flash drives. I think you can also find it at College Geek Info, the website, if you can Google that, on how to make better flash drives, flashcards, sorry. And the thing that that information covers is that you're wanting the flashcards that you make to review content to eliminate or reduce the error of illusions of competence. And what I mean by that is that experience of believing that because we recognize certain information, that we know that information. We make the mistake of assuming that recognition is recall. And I'll give you a great example of that. Let's say we have a list of 5 steps to completing a successful takeoff. I'll use that as an example again. And we have on the front of the flashcard, what are the 5 steps to a successful takeoff? And on the back of the flashcard, we have step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going down the flashcard in our head. Before we flip it over, we get to 4, and we're stuck, or we give an answer, and we flip it over, and we see that either we were stuck, so we finally see what the 5th step is, or we flipped it over and we discovered that what we thought was the 5th step was not actually the 5th step. We said something different there, but we recognize what the 5th step is. And say, oh, I knew that. I knew that information. What in actuality is that you recognize the information, but because you weren't able to recall it correctly, or that you just were kind of blank on that particular item, it shows you that you don't actually know the information because you weren't able to recall. Instead, a better, more effective or efficient way to do flashcards would be to have what's the first step of a successful takeoff, and then on the back of it have one answer. Then another flashcard, what's the second step in a successful takeoff, and then on the back of that card have the second answer. The reason for that is that every time you flip it over, you get more accurate feedback, whether or not you actually know that information. And the boost that you get is that every time you get those responses correct, it sharpens your perspective on how prepared you are, so that you know, I know the answer to this specific item, I know the answer to the specific flashcard. And those things go a huge way. It's going to boost your confidence going into that check ride, because we have a more accurate measure of how prepared we actually are for that particular experience. Mnemonics can be a great way of learning some of that information for that recall. So there's a ton of mnemonics in aviation. So examples would be things like I'm safe or decide, and being able to have, what does the I in I'm safe stand for? And flip it over, that's what it stands for. It might result in you having more cards, but every time you flip through those cards and you're successful, you have a stronger belief, stronger knowledge that you know that particular information, and that boosts your confidence as you're going into the check ride. The research indicates that studying, testing are some of the things that help you prepare best. What I mean by study, test, a lot of times what I find with not only our aviation students, but students in general, is that if they have an exam or something coming up, they'll spend a lot of time reading content, they'll read their notes, they'll look over PowerPoints, they'll do all of this information where they're trying to get as much information in. However, they spend little time or a lot less time recalling that information. So saying that information out loud, or making sure that they not only read and understood the information, but they can recall it when needed. The example that I give to my students is in taking that information, because learning is consistent of 2 parts. So encoding the information, getting the information from the source into your head, and then retrieving that information. That's when you actually know something. If I were to say to you, here's a number, a phone number, and I give you those 9 digits or 10 digits, sorry, for the phone number, and you repeat it to me and you look at it, you kind of put it in your head, and then I ask you to say, hey, what was the phone number? Unless you're able to recall it or tell me what that phone number is, you don't actually know it. It's like having a really detailed map for a treasure, knowing exactly where the treasure is located, but never going back to get that treasure or retrieve that treasure from the location. It's as good as lost. So that's why it's important to not only go through the process of using some sort of means, whether it's flashcards or mnemonics or having a study guide, etc., that you're learning the information, but retrieving it is also important. A great way of doing that would be discussing something with a friend, so having them kind of go through the flashcards with you, speaking it out loud, because it's important for you to hear the answer that you have so that you're actually committing to a specific response and you're not kind of torn or caught in between, because that's one of the things that can kind of happen that leads to that illusion of competence. We don't actually say it out loud. We might be thinking about two things, and then when we see the answer as one of those two things, we say, oh, I knew it because I was thinking about one of those two things. That's not actually recalling the specific information. Have that declarative statement of what it is. Because the more you do that, the more confident you're going to be that you're going to be able to do that in the future as well. For the things that are more dynamic, you want to have a great organizational system for that. Have it all documented, noted, whether it's an iPad, a tablet, having a notebook, or some sort of logbook where you can have all of that information readily accessible for when you're in that that check ride, especially the oral component, that you can pull that information up without having uncertainty as to where to find that specific information. Because whenever there is uncertainty or us questioning whether or not we have the tools or the information that we need at any given time, that's when we're going to see nervousness be a lot higher. That's when we're going to see anxiety be a lot higher. Other things that can help you get a more accurate perception of your preparation is things like practicing your check ride with someone other than your regular flight instructor. So finding a different instructor from the DPE that's going to be giving you your practice, to give you your practice check ride. So if you are at Riddle, I think we have like an internal check ride process, and then we have the FAA check ride process. For that internal check ride, you probably want to do it with someone that's a little bit different than the instructor that you're used to flying with. One of the reasons is that it's going to give you the experience of what it would be like to be in a check ride situation. It's going to help you get information about how prepared you are, what some of the expectations may be of a different instructor, so that you can anticipate for the next time, okay, these are some of the things that I'll do to be successful with this maneuver or communicate your intention, whether you're responding to an oral question or you're kind of giving feedback or clarification for how you completed a maneuver during the flight component. Chair flying is another way. We'll get into that a little bit later on in the workshop that can help you get information about how prepared you are for the specific task and maneuvers. So we're going to move on to the C in the ACE, your check ride acronym, which is overcoming the physical and calming anxiety, overcoming the physical and mental symptoms of anxiety. So some of the physical symptoms of anxiety are as follows: so increased heart rate, jitteriness, increased rate of speech, sweating, tension in the gut or our shoulders, loss of appetite. Mental components for anxiety can look like increased tension, lowered situational awareness, which is really connected to us focusing outside of the present moment. So we're not actually responding to the things that are going on. Oftentimes, our focus is on the past. So maybe we're thinking about a particular maneuver that we did previously that we were unsuccessful in or struggled in, or we're thinking about the future. We're worried about what the outcome of our check ride is going to be. In either case, our focus isn't on the present moment, the things that are going on in the aircraft or the things that are going on in that oral exam room that we can actually respond to. It shortens our attention span, it inhibits our concentration, and ultimately it lessens our performance. And the reason for that is that there's an inverse relationship between arousal or anxiety and performance. Performance-based anxiety is often not connected to the present moment, but is worried, like I said, about the past or fears about the future. So if we look at the table there, we'll see that we do need some level of anxiety. We do need some level of arousal oftentimes. Those are the things that lead us to kind of narrow our focus and kind of zero in on the things that we need to really concentrate on, do well on, That's probably the reason why you're watching this workshop, because there is some level of anxiety that's causing you to try to make the best attempts to be prepared for your check ride. So what that might look like is starting to study in advance or researching things that would be helpful for your check ride experience. You do need some, but what we see is that there is a peak at some point. This is sort of in the middle here. I like to say somewhere between like a 5 and 7. So 4 and 7 maybe is where you will usually, for most people, see your optimal performance. There's enough anxiety or arousal that it's kind of gotten you into gear as far as the focusing on the performance and the performance outcomes, but it's not so high if we look at the high end of arousal, where it's maybe a 10, 9, 8, even a 7, where we see our performance is a little bit lower than if we were maybe at a 5 or a 6 right in the middle, where our performance might be the most optimal. We start to see a degradation or falling off. And that's really important for you to know, where am I in terms of my arousal, and what can I do to get my arousal into, or my anxiety into that optimal zone. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on things that can sort of act as a relaxation or a calming effect for us, and also things that help us bring our attention back to the present moment and what we're doing at that time. One of the things I like to do is instruct students to do is a body scan, something that can be done really quickly, anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes, where you just notice the different portions or different parts of your body, what's kind of going on at that moment, and how you can kind of respond to signal a calming effect and kind of bringing your attention back into the physical space. So what that might look like is, for me, starting at my feet. So I have my feet kind of firmly planted on the ground, where just kind of noticing the sensations in my feet, making note of my feet, ankles, noticing my calves, so my shins, my quads, my hamstrings, my pelvic area, my gut, stomach. Notice my chest and rising, falling, tension in there, shoulders, lower back, mid back, upper back. Notice my hands, my arms, my forearms, biceps, triceps, neck, going to my face, brow, top of my head. Just slowly kind of walking yourself through that. You can do that with your eyes open while you're focusing on a non-distracting spot, or you can close your eyes if that's something that feels more comfortable or is accessible to you at that time. And kind of doing that little bit of a scan will give you some insight into how your body's feeling in that moment and what might be an appropriate response. For me, when I'm feeling somewhat tense, stressed, or anxious, I tend to feel it in my shoulders. So like between my shoulder blades, I may be holding my shoulders a little bit high sometimes, it might be lifted. My jaw might be clenched. My brows might be furrowed. Kind of like this kind of concentration in that way. So what I'm, kind of signaling to myself is drop my shoulders, relax my jaw, soften my brows, and that kind of signals to me, okay, relax, calm. In this moment, I've gotten in touch with my body, which is in the present moment, and now I can focus external from my body in terms of where I am, the room, what action I may be performing, and what might be the next from me. Other things that can be great is deep breathing. So there's a little bit of a deep breathing script that I'll go through. It takes us about 5 minutes or so. And then we have an example on the right side of the screen of square breathing technique, which is a little bit more accessible at any point in time. But I'll go through the script for the deep breathing practice. We're going to be doing 5 deep breaths. So the most effective method of focusing your mind is simple breathing exercise. So I want you to close your eyes and calmly inhale through your nose. You should feel a slight cooling effect as you suck air in. And you can think to yourself, cool. When you exhale, you should feel a slightly warmer amount of air exiting. So you can think to yourself, warm out. You just want to keep doing this until all you think about is cool in and warm out sensation. And soon you notice that there's a relaxing effect as you breathe in, cool in, warm out. You feel your body sink into the chair, bed, moment, your arms may hang to your side, and other sensations that you might observe or notice that signals to a sense of calm and relaxation. The thing that's important to note, or something that I like to point out for anyone that I'm doing some relaxation techniques with, is that it's really important to use that or develop a practice with them at times where you're not very anxious, very aroused, because it can sometimes be a whole lot more difficult to notice the calming or relaxing effect when we're really anxious or really stressed. We want to develop the confidence, the belief, and the knowledge that the things that we're doing to have that calming effect is going to be effective and it's going to work for us. The best way to do that is to practice these specific tools, these specific skills, when we're mildly to moderately anxious, not super high, because that way we're able to get a sense of how effective it is for us. So something like deep breathing, body scan, and softening my muscles, which is a little bit of a body scan and then deep muscle relaxation. I know that it's going to make me calmer by about 2 to 3 points. So if I was at a 7, now I'm going to be at a 5 or a 4 in terms of feeling a little bit calmer, feeling a little bit more relaxed. For you, it might be different. The more you do some of these relaxation techniques, the more effective and efficient they are. The more efficient you become at them, and the more effective they are, because you know that there's going to be some effect, and you're not in that situation questioning, is this going to work or is this not going to work? Because that creates a level of uncertainty, and wherever there's uncertainty, anxiety is sure to follow. So when you practice it outside of those high need moments, you provide yourself the opportunity to know that it's going to be successful, know that it's going to be helpful to you in the future, and you're able to actually see the benefits of it. I encourage students that are flight students, and they have flights coming up, they have their check ride coming up, to start that relaxation practice, not day of, kind of prior to that. So maybe like the week before, or maybe 2 weeks leading up to their check ride. If they know or they have that much of day's notice, that they start doing some of those relaxation practices so they know that it's going to have that effect going forward. A simple one that you can do, especially if you're in, even if you're in flight, these are one of the things that you can do, which is, square breathing. You inhale for a count of 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and you exhale for 4, and then you do that process again as many times as may be needed. I like to suggest doing it 4 times, and then you can check in with yourself to see how you're feeling. And the encouragement that I've given to students in the past is that if you're answering a question in the oral portion of your check ride, or you are about to perform a particular maneuver, that might not be a bad time to, between questions or between maneuvers, to take that deep breath. If you've watched basketball in the past, you probably see that as the players are about to take a free throw or something along those lines, they may hold the basketball, bounce it 2 times, catch the basketball, bounce it 2 times. You see them take a breath, and then they do that shot. And it's kind of the same thing, right? So you have a question. And answer the question. That's a very exaggerated, because I want you all to be able to see, kind of maybe hear what that breath sounds like. But it could be, you go forward. Just giving yourself that opportunity to sort of slow things down. That it doesn't have to be really, really rushed from one thing to the next. To ensure that you're at a calm rate, or that you're anxieties within that optimal performance zone. We're not too aroused, we're not too anxious to where performance is beginning to suffer. Okay. So the last one that we'll kind of talk about in terms of calming your anxiety and remaining in that optimal zone is chair flying. But more importantly, a lot of you may be familiar with chair flying, where you're sitting in the chair in front of maybe a mock-up of your cockpit or a poster, and you kind of walk yourself through all of the steps that you're going to take on that check ride. So moment to moment procedures that you're going to do. So really visualizing it. And what I'd encourage you to do in addition to that is trying to replicate what that feeling of anxiety might be like as you're connecting to the level of anxiety that you may have in that moment as you're doing those particular actions. And the reason for that is that oftentimes when I speak with students where they're answering a question or they're unsure about a particular maneuver or procedure that they're doing in the aircraft, is that they're afraid that they'll forget something, that their mind will go blank. They won't be able to essentially perform or answer in that particular moment. When you do things like chair flying or like a mock interview of the oral component of the check ride, what you do is that you give yourself the information and the knowledge that you can have a certain level of anxiety and still perform that particular task. That gives you more confidence going forward that a lot of times you may have a student that wants to say, okay, I know I'll be able to do it when I feel no anxiety whatsoever. Anytime there is a full feeling of anxiety that they might encounter during the check ride, they're all of a sudden questioning, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Can I do this thing? You know, would I be able to be successful even because I am anxious in this moment? Being able to sort of replicate those exam room conditions or that check ride sort of experience, whether it's in a chair flying moment or exercise, or flying with a flight instructor that you're not familiar with. Like when you are able to do those things, you get the knowledge of it, even when my anxiety is at a 4 or 5 or even at a 6 or 7, I'm still able to do and perform this particular task. That's the thing that helps you gain more confidence that you're able to function effectively as the moment requires, to stay in the moment and those positive or successful outcomes. And finally, as far as the E of the ACE acronym is the external factors plan, overcoming the external pressures connected to the check ride. This is going to be more adaptive and personal to each particular student because everyone has certain things that are connected to the outcome of the check ride. So that there are maybe pressures based on whether or not pressures connected, to whether or not you pass or you fail or are unsuccessful with the check ride. Everyone has motivations that help move them towards that goal. Maybe there is added pressures. So if I need to be successful in this check ride because I have a celebration planned, or I'm meeting up with friends, or I'm supposed to go on this flight afterwards, that all of those things kind of add or have the potential to add stress to that moment. And we want to be aware of that potential and address it accordingly, do certain things to allow for us to better manage or handle the stress that might be connected to that. Personal plan. So I like to think of it in terms of the week of, the night before, and the day of. So that there are things that you're wanting to do the week leading into. So if you're getting support from family and friends and say, hey, like I'm having a check ride coming up next week, I like to encourage students to provide like a time frame versus a specific day and time, because that gives you the option for being able to say, okay, I can take that discontinuance. I didn't say exactly the date and time, so I'm not going to be flooded with these calls and concerns about how the check ride went. And say, okay, next week I'll be doing it at some point. And it allows you to be able to take a discontinuance and complete the other portion of the check ride at another date, and then communicate back to friends and family or people that are supporting you the outcome of that particular that particular check ride experience. You're wanting to practice those self-care items, so ensuring that you're well slept, kind of leading up to your check ride as best as you can, that you're getting adequate nutrition, that you're taking care of your body, and that you're wanting to start some of that relaxation practice prior to the day of that check ride. Okay. Other things that you may do is completing that practice check ride flight with a different instructor. All of those things may be a part of your personal plan that you do the week of your check ride. Night before, you might make sure you have good sleep. You might use a relaxation app. There's a lot of them in terms of Headspace, Calm, or even if you were to Google or search on YouTube, different relaxation scripts or guided experiences that you can listen to prior to, so that you get a good night's sleep. You don't want to be kind of cramming the night before, showing up fatigued in any way for your check ride experience. You want to wake up at sufficient time to get to the aircraft, get to the airfield that you're going to be flying out of. You want to give yourself any additional stressors by having to rush to get to a particular location, showing up where you're already at a 5, 6, 7 in terms of your arousal, and knowing that the check ride experience is going to be somewhat stressful, and that your stress is only going to go up from there. You want to give yourself the opportunity to be as calm and as relaxed going into it, having a good breakfast, doing something like a deep breathing or mindfulness meditation at the beginning of your day, so that your level of overall stress, your level of overall anxiety is a lot lower, so you have that buffer to kind of go up as the stress of the day kind of builds. Those are all things that you're going to do the night before, and then as far as the day, wanting you to really think about those things that will set you up as best as possible to have a good outcome. And then lastly, if there were certain things that were helpful as a part of this this workshop, but you find yourself having additional questions or wanting to maybe spend more time looking into your own unique experience, you can certainly reach out to myself or any counselor here at the Embry-Riddle Counseling Center to schedule a time to kind of develop that personal plan a little bit further. You can reach out to us at social media, or you can give us a call at the number on the slide. There are a couple of different things, especially for sort of those chair flying experiences. If you're at Riddle, you may be familiar with our YouTube channel. It's Embry-Riddle, ERAU special VFR. And they have a lot of wonderful videos about the specific maneuvers that you're going to be required to do for various parts of your check ride experience. This is really incredibly helpful. And then there, if you look on to YouTube, you can also find great experiences of pilot students talking about the ways that they prepare. That was helpful for me getting an understanding of what the check ride experience is like, and the things that students have generally found to be really helpful in preparing for it. There was another video that I was able to locate that discussed or talked about what it was like to have a discontinuance and the benefit of being able to reflect on that experience in terms of the things that the pilot was prepared for and wasn't prepared for, and how to navigate those situations going forward. So I hope this workshop was really helpful to you. Again, if you have any questions or any concerns, please reach out, and we'd be happy to assist and help you here at the Counseling Center. Thanks.